John is an acclaimed international speaker. He trained exclusively under the late, great Zig Ziglar. I mean, he's a big deal. And I was like, man, it would be great to get this guy. He's like, sure, I'd love to do it. And I was like, well, now we got to put this thing on. I mean, this guy's coming. After that, he continued to serve. John has been a regular at the United States Air Force's Squadron Commander training class. And so when we put together the smallest unit that an Air Force will operate at in a difficult environment, those leaders were trained by John. And routinely, he would get the highest feedback remarks. So the generals would come to us and say, hey, how did I do in my talk? And we would say, oh, you did fantastic, sir. And they'd say, well, was I number one? And we'd say, you did really great, because John was always number one. And I couldn't bear to bring that up. John is, the service continues. He's the executive director of the St. Vincent de Paul here in St. Louis, continues to serve. An artist, an author, you'll see his book, we'll talk about that, a painter, an exquisite home remodeler, a chef, a budding TV reality star. He's all of these things, but I think what I want you to know is he's a true servant at heart, a man of deep faith and conviction, someone that we are very proud to host here today. And yes, by the way, he was born without arms, but I will tell you that might be the first thing that you noticed about him. It would be the last thing that I would use to describe him. So without further ado, my dear friend, Mr. John Foppe.
Thank you, Matt. After that introduction, I can't wait to hear what I have to say. Let's get comfortable with each other as we spend a little time here this morning getting to know each other. You see this guy up here without any arms and these empty sleeves, and there's probably a lot of things that are going through your mind about right now. I want us to become comfortable because I hope to say some things that hopefully are going to ring a bell in your own life. But not quite the same way it happened to this other guy who was in my same situation. It's a corny story, but I think it's appropriate. It's about a guy just like me who didn't have any arms, and he needed a job. So he went to the pastor of his church, and he asked him for a position. The pastor said, I really don't have anything, except my bell ringer position. But you don't have any arms. You can't do that. And the guy said, hey, it's a tough economy. At least let me give it a try. So the pastor said, okay, have at it. And the guy walked into the church, and he saw these long ropes hanging down from the bell tower. Not having any hands, he knew he couldn't grab them, but he gets an idea. To get up, take a running charge, and hit the bell with his face. Bong! The bell rang, but he knocked himself out. Fell out of the church steeple, landed on the sidewalk. Well, a crowd of people gathered around. They were wondering what happened. Who was this guy? The pastor came around the side of the church. They asked him. He said, I don't know who he is, but his face sure does ring a bell. I warned you it was corny. But I'm glad that we can laugh, because it's in laughing that we have fun, and it's in having fun we really do learn the most. So probably right about now you just want to learn, how does this guy do it? How does he do the day-to-day things in his life that I sometimes struggle with doing with my own 2 hands and 10 fingers? And I'll give you an opportunity a little later to ask some questions. But basically the answer to most of those questions is that I use my feet for everything that you use your hands for. There's not a special school anywhere in the world that you can go to learn how to use your feet. It's just that the human body, with the power of the human mind, has an incredible capacity to adapt. I've learned in my life that there really are no unsolvable problems. There just are an awful lot of problems in life that haven't been solved yet. Cheers. Go ahead, you can clap. Find that most of my audiences want to, and I'm not going to argue if you want to give me a hand. All right, this is your warning. The jokes will deteriorate from here. Folks, I have had the wonderful privilege over the last, almost 25 years now to travel all around this great world of ours and to work with people and organizations from all walks of life. I have literally worked with everyone from the Defense Department to florists, from politicians to prisoners. Well, okay, that was the same group. Finally, an audience that likes political jokes. I do too, unless they get elected. But in all those years of traveling, something interesting happens. I often get the same question. No matter where I go, people want to know what is the correct, the sensitive, the proper word that you should use to describe someone in my situation. Here in America, of course, we have a lot of words for it. Is it a disability? Am I handicapped? Do I have special needs? Am I physically challenged? What is it? And after all the years and all the different terms, we still wrestle with it. I don't really get into the labels, but if you would insist that I'd give you a word that I think would accurately describe it, I would have to give you the word condition. You see, I've become convinced through my travels that every one of us wrestles with some type of a condition in our life. Well, what's a condition? A condition is simply a basic part of who you are, of your life, or maybe your job, that can sometimes get in your way of living a full, happy, and productive life. Now, that could be something as obvious as being a female who has to work with a bunch of males. It could be being a member of a minority race. It could be being single, married, widowed, divorced. It could be only having a GED. Those are obvious conditions. Everybody knows that you have them. And then, of course, there are conditions that are deep down inside, and only you know that they exist. Maybe that's wrestling with an addiction, confronting a spiritual crisis in your life. You have professional conditions, whether it be budget constraints or increasing regulations or competition. So all of us have things in our life that can potentially make us feel overwhelmed and that life's out of control at times. The reason why I'm here is to speak about how not to let those conditions become the handicap. See, I'm going to talk to you and share with you some stories from my early life about how, yes, I was born without arms, but I created a disability. And up until about 11 years old, I really led a life marked by dependency. Couldn't even get dressed myself. But more importantly, I had to learn how to uncreate that, take responsibility, uncreate that, and create a new reality. That's really why I'm here today, is to talk about how we are all co-creators of our own reality. I did not say that you are the sole creator. I said that you are a co-creator. What do I mean by that? Well, my work is based on just a couple very simple premises. Number one, you can't change a lot of things. You can't change the weather, you can't change the economy, you can't change the political environment. There's a lot that you can't change. I'll go so far as to say that you can't change other people. Number two, the only thing we really have the power to change is ourselves. So, if we can't change others and we can only change ourselves, that's what I'd like to talk about today. I'd like to talk about how when we take responsibility and focus on what we have the power to change versus what we don't have the power to change, we'll see that we can move the ball a whole lot farther down the field than we ever thought imaginable when we stand at the beginning, looking from a world of maybe excuses or blame or a limited locus of control. I'm going to talk about how as co-creators of our own reality, that's all comes down to basically making your dream, turning your goals into reality. For an organization, it means executing your strategic plan. It means bringing your dreams alive. How we have the ability to do that when we kind of get our mind and our head screwed on straight. I'm going to acknowledge to you also that there are limitations in the world. I learned a long time ago that even if I had the longest, strongest, toughest pair of arms in the world, there's only so many things that I could carry, only so high I could reach, only so much weight I could bear. I am not some idealistic, motivational speaker that's going to come in here today, slap you on your back, tell you to put your chin up, and that just everything is possible. Believe me, if anyone understands about limitations in life, it's a guy without arms. For example, I can drive a car. I can drive any car as long as it has automatic transmission and power steering. Here's how I do it. My right foot operates the gas and brake. My left foot operates the steering wheel. And it's off, I drive. Look, Mom, no hands. Now you had to know that joke was going to show up somewhere. And now it's fantastic. I can drive all over. But if I get out here on Highway 40 and have a flat tire, I'm not going anywhere. Or let's think about this limitation. Pretend that just you and I are stranded on some desert island somewhere, and you suddenly get sick and need CPR from me. You're out of luck. I mean, I suppose I could try one of these. Breathe, sucker, breathe. But I don't think we're going to get anywhere. Are there limits in life? Of course there are limits. The question becomes, what do we do in the midst of them? You see, I find that all too often, most of the time when we run up against limiting conditions in our life, most of the time we tend to back off. We don't push it, we don't question it, we don't challenge it, and all too often we allow the limitation to become the excuse that confines and defines us into a limited existence. And that's exactly what happened to me as a child. Now, obviously, my most apparent condition is the fact that I was born without arms. The doctors don't know why. We still don't know why. I don't care to know why, because I can't change it. All any of us can do is look ahead to today and to tomorrow. But if you can imagine, when I was born, there were a lot of shock waves and heated emotions that ripped through my family. My parents were only 27 and 28 years old when they had me. They're from a small town over in southern Illinois, about 40 miles east of here. They already had 3 sons. I was supposed to be their little girl. So I came into the world not a healthy little girl, but a sickly, disabled baby boy, and their lives were turned upside down. There was fear, there was anger, there was guilt, but most of all fear. Because now they had so many questions staring them in the face, demanding answers, and there were no good ones. But they still asked the questions. What if John's not able to live a normal life? What if he's not accepted by his peers? How's he going to eat? How's he going to get dressed? How's he going to fend for his day-to-day needs? But most of all, they just asked those why questions. But somehow, I believe through the grace of God, they pulled together and began to help me adapt to my adversity so that I could achieve as I went throughout life. The first time Mom and Dad ever saw me doing any kind of physical adapting to my condition, I was a toddler sitting at home on the kitchen table playing with toothpicks. With my left foot, I picked up a toothpick and I brought it to my face for a closer look. And of course, at that age, everything goes in the mouth, and I licked it. And then I stuck it in a sugar bowl, and I rubbed it around and got a lot of sugar on the toothpick, and then I licked the sugar off. And I threw it, when I was finished, I threw it on the floor. That one gesture gave Mom and Dad so much hope that I would be able to use my feet for things. And as you can see, I do, whether, it's pouring a glass of water or typing on a computer or whatever it is. And I was fortunate. I felt loved and accepted. I really didn't see myself as that different. That is not until I went out to school for the first time. And I can clearly remember that first day of school as though it was yesterday, when all my peers darted out onto that playground and jumped on the monkey bars and the swing sets, and all I could do was stand behind and start asking a lot of serious questions. Questions like, who am I? Why am I here? Why did this have to happen to me? Why didn't it happen to my older brother, Tom? I don't like him anyway. Of course, I didn't get good answers to those questions, and instead, something tragic happened. Each day as I went off to school, I found myself isolated on the sideline of the playground. And this is where the reality creation process started, where the disability began. Everything in life, every situation that you find yourself in, begins with your perception of it. From the time you get out of bed in the morning, you start forming perceptions. You say to yourself, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, and this is true or this is false. And as I stood there on the sidelines of the playground, I had one predominant perception about life. I was different. Once the perception is formed, emotions kick in. Again, it could be anything, but the emotions start. And for me, it was like a downward spiral of despair, like an airplane coming crashing to the ground. Because the fear kicked in. What if I went out there and I tried and I failed? The fear of failure. What if I went out there and I slowed my peers down? The fear of rejection. What if I went out there and caused a scene? The fear of embarrassment. And it wasn't long before the fears festered, combined with the loneliness and the isolation. The mind went further into the tailspin, quickly gave way to a lot of anger and bitterness. I got the proverbial chip on my shoulder. I thought the world owed me everything because of the way that I was created. After all, life wasn't fair. I remember thinking about how I'd never be able to ride a bike or play ball or wear a wedding ring or hold a girlfriend's hand or anything like that. And then that spun into frustration, that frustration of all those things that I couldn't do. From there, it led to ingratitude. I wasn't thankful for a loving family or a school system that mainstreamed me. And then finally, all of that came crashing to the ground when I hit self-pity, the most corrosive of all emotions. Now, I have this mental image that I like to use to describe my state of mind at the time, because we can all relate to it. I call how I felt the pity pot. Now, all of us have a pity pot. It doesn't matter if we're 5 or if we're 55. We all have them. Just as we get older, they're kind of gold-plated and rhinestone-studded in our minds because we have good excuses for it. Lots of evidence. The pity pot is simply the comfortable place that we retreat to when those conditions in your life that I ask you to think about, when they flare up and they remind you of your shortcomings. And then the emotion kicks in. And it really doesn't matter what it is. It could be anger, fear, guilt, stress, burnout, whatever. But once the emotion starts kicking in and swirling around, it's like life starts flushing away into this whirlpool. Because somewhere in the midst of it, there's this little voice that starts talking to you. Now, some of you are looking at me like, John, you need a therapist. You're hearing voices. But let's listen for just a second, and I can guarantee you that you too can hear that same voice. Let's listen. Hear it? It's going 100 miles an hour in your mind right now. And it's saying things like, what voice? What's he talking about? It's hot in here. It's cold in here. I'm hungry. What time are we going to get out of here? How does he do that with his feet? That voice. That one that's just constantly chattering away. And sometimes this voice says some powerful and positive things. But let's face it, most of the time it's pretty negative. And at that time in my life, my voice was just out of control, and it was saying things like, oh, I hate this. I can't do this. There's no use. Why should I? Nobody cares. Nobody understands. Those people down there, they'll never get it. Has your little voice ever said anything like that to you? If so, you're only human. But I bet we can all identify some times in our life when we've had those kind of thoughts. The problem is, if we allow it to go unchecked, it all continues to become real. You see, it begins with the perception, then it's the emotion. And from there, the emotion spills over into our interactions with ourselves and with each other, or to put it in business vernacular, into practices at work. See, because the emotion becomes formalized, it becomes proceduralized, it becomes ritualized, and it becomes an identity, if you will. So for me, my self-esteem was low, my attitudes were negative, my motivation was non-existent, I barely did what I had to do, and I don't even know if I did that. I had a kindergarten teacher who realized it was getting to be a real problem. So one day she decided she was going to motivate me. And she broke out classic kindergarten classroom curriculum, the story of the little engine that could. Can I see a show of hands? Everybody ever heard of Waddy Piper's book? Good. And I don't have to tell it, and you're going to get out of here on time, hopefully. So the teacher read the book to the class. She sat us down. She read it. And then she asked me to do something for her. I don't remember what it was. It's not important. But what I do remember is what I said afterwards. Without knowing it, I said something very powerful and profound as a 5-year-old little boy. I said, you know, Mrs. Niebrugge, I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. But I don't want to. As little kids, we say things like that. As adults, we just think it. We wouldn't dare say it. How many times in our life do we stand in front of an opportunity, a relationship, a goal, a project, a plan, and that little voice is talking in our head, and it says, I think I can if we committed enough time to it. I think I can if we invested enough energy in it. I think I can if we put enough resources in it. I think I can if I trusted and I was vulnerable. But then we don't do it. We often allow a lot of trivial and whimsical excuses to come into our life and knock us off of our path. Now, no conversation about how you execute on a strategic plan or how you make your dreams a reality or how you achieve your goals, none of that would be complete if we didn't talk for just a little bit about excuses, how they work. Why would we like to use them anyway if they're so counterproductive? A number of years ago, I sat down to write a book. Now, I wanted to write a good book. I didn't want to write the typical inspiring story of someone with a disability. You know the kind. I was born, my mom cried, I got beat up in the 3rd grade, blah, blah, blah. That's not what I wanted to write. I wanted to write a book that would help people. But as I mapped out the teachable moments of my life, I found this whole theme of excuses emerge. So I began to dig a little deeper into what are they and how do they work. And we could do a whole seminar on excuses, which we're not going to do today. But basically, it comes down to a couple of things. Excuses make us feel special. And I know that sounds weird and in some sort of warped way. I can't explain the psychology behind it. But for many people, it makes us irreproachable. Because how dare could someone challenge a disabled person, or how dare could they pretend, to know what it's like or whatever. So we become irreproachable. The second thing is that excuses take on a life of their own. It's kind of like a lie that your grandma told you you should never do. Why did she tell you shouldn't lie? Because one lie always leads to another lie. Excuses are the same way. One excuse always leads to another excuse. They're autopoietic. It's a concept of modern biology where biologists say that something is alive if it has the capacity to create itself. And that's what excuses are. But the big thing is that if we use it often enough, it actually becomes real. You see, excuses are simply messages that we tell ourselves to make sense of our world. They might be grounded in a lot of good evidence, but there's still something that we tell ourselves. In other words, they're an event. There's an event out there in life, and then we make it mean something. We tell ourselves a story about it. So for a lot of us, it began at an early age. The first time we fell off our bike, or we peed in our pants at school, or whatever. When we had our first failure in life, we told ourselves something. I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not big enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not from the right part of town, yada, yada. And we do that to make sense of the pain. Now, this sounds a little pop psychology, so let me bring this down to earth with a story that kind of illustrates what I'm trying to say. It's a story about two old men who were best of friends growing up and lost contact with each other. But one day they were out on the street corner of the big city, both out walking their dogs in retirement, and bumped into each other. Names were Fred and Joe. Joe said to Fred, "It is so good to see you. Let's go get a cup of coffee and catch up on our old times." Fred said, "That'd be great, but what are we going to do with our dogs? We can't take them into a restaurant." Joe thought a minute. He says, "I got an idea. Let's put our dark glasses on, our sunglasses, pretend that we're blind, and that these are our service dogs. It'll be the perfect excuse." And off they went. So Fred walks into the restaurant first, and the hostess stops him at the door. "So what are you doing bringing that pet in here?" He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you don't understand, but this is my service dog." And she said, "Since when do they allow boxers to be service dogs?" He said, "Oh, since very recently, and it's working out quite well." "I don't know. Go on ahead." And then in followed Joe, and she stops him. "Sir, what are you doing with that chihuahua?" And Joe said, "You mean they gave me a chihuahua?" It's a Federal Express joke. You in the back will get it in the morning. But that's how excuses work. If we use it often enough, if we think it often enough, it becomes real. And that's exactly what happened to me growing up. As a child with a disability, the line between what I legitimately could do with my feet and what I legitimately could not do easily got blurred. How? People felt sorry for me. And at any slight sign of a struggle, they jumped in and gave me a hand. Well, it didn't take this crafty kid long to realize that whatever I didn't want to do, somebody do it for me. The ultimate manager's dream. I was able to take my pity pot and convert it into a throne. My brothers helped me in the morning get dressed to go to school. They met up with me during the day to use the bathroom. My classmates carried my books around the school. They took my lunch tray from the cafeteria line to the table, and they even washed my feet before I ate. Of course, Mom and Dad didn't like any of this. They tried to show me how other men with similar disabilities adapted their clothing to help themselves. I would have none of it. They helped me get artificial arms from the Shriners Hospital here in St. Louis, but the prosthetics were hot, heavy, and cumbersome, and I didn't like to wear them. Instead, it was easier for me to manipulate and connive at every turn. They showed me how other men with similar disabilities adapted and helped themselves. I didn't want to meet them. At every turn, I manipulated and connived. And it got so bad that at 10 years old, I couldn't even put my own pants on. Again, it started with a perception I was different. Then it was the downward spiral of despair. Or the emotions. Over time, those emotions took on an identity for my interactions. And then all of that came together and it created a reality. And the reality was called a disability. Now, I didn't see anything wrong with it. I mean, after all, I was a small kid from a small town. Where was I going to go? But then one day, I unconsciously messed up. It was a hot May afternoon, only a couple days left in the school year, and this motivational speaker came to our school to try to sell us all on the idea of going to a summer camp deep in the Shawnee National Forest of southern Illinois. Think about this. To a bunch of 10-year-old, 5th grade boys, this sounded like an incredible adventure. A week or two in the woods, horseback riding, canoeing, hiking, fishing, swimming, campfires. All my friends were going. My 3 older brothers had gone in previous years. Of course I wanted to go. And I darted home with the paperwork and I asked Mom to sign off. But there's a very powerful and peculiar way that mothers think. Here I was, 10 years old, couldn't even get my own pants on, wanted to spend a couple of weeks in the woods. What do you think Mom said? No. No? What do you mean, no? See, at 10 years old, most little boys think they have the worst moms in the world. Mine was confirming it. This wasn't fair. I mentioned to you a minute ago that I have 3 older brothers, Bill, Joe, and Tom. But what I haven't told you is that I also have 4 younger brothers, Ron, Jim, Patrick, and Paul. Yep, that's 8 sons. Patrick and Paul, the youngest, are twins. Their middle initial is H. It stands for haystack. Patrick, Paul, haystack, Foppe. Because when they were born, my father said, this is the last straw. If you're the parents of 8 kids, you might get a little busy, constantly helping one with homework, running another one to ball practice, running me to the doctor. Somewhere in the midst of it, they got tired of fighting, and time passed on. But when I came home that afternoon and asked to go to camp, a wake-up call had gone off in Mom's mind, and she realized how quickly I was growing up. And if I didn't start changing then, that I probably never would. She realized something, not in the exact words that I'll put it now, that the mentality creates the identity, and the identity creates the reality. She didn't put it in those terms, but she knew that somehow in the back of her mind. So none of the other things were working. The other examples from other disabled men, the artificial arms, adapting, none of it was working. They were at the end of the proverbial rope. So Mom and Dad decided that evening that the moment was right, and they called a meeting with all 7 of my brothers. and sat them down and explained to them that things just had to change. The bribing, the coaxing, the artificial arms, none of it was working. And they were at the end of that proverbial rope. So they were going to practice something that we in America call tough love. Wow, what is that? It's a term we throw around a lot. Some people say it's when you can sacrifice the short-term tears for the laughter of a lifetime. Other people say it's when you can say no to an immediate choice today so that you can say yes to a better opportunity that lies in tomorrow. Coaches put it to athletes this way: no pain, no gain. And this is what my parents were trying to teach my brothers that night. It was going to be tough. Why? Because John could be ugly and stubborn, and if they weren't careful, this whole thing could blow up in their face. But because they loved me, they wanted me to live a fuller life. They had no idea what that meant or what that looked like. But it had to be something better than this dependent, different, disabled thing that was running around the house making everybody else depressed. So here was the plan. Mom and Dad sat them down and explained to them that there would be no more help. None. And that meant if John couldn't get dressed in the morning, fine, he won't go to school. And then they ended the meeting with a final charge. If we catch any of you helping him, you will be the one disciplined for it. Well, I wasn't invited. The next morning I woke up, I went through my manipulative little con game that I played countless mornings before with my younger brother Ron to get dressed. He and I shared a bedroom together. And like countless mornings before, Ron grabbed my pants out of the chest of drawers and he started to hold them open for me to step into. And just as I was putting my left leg in, suddenly he remembered what he was doing and he jerked them back and he seemed to be frozen. And he was frozen between fear and compassion. Compassion for his brother. Fear from his mother. So I stormed off to confront Mom. Now what I'm describing to you is the first turning point in helping me deal with this condition. It's not the only one. There have been others since. There will continue to be more. People ask, how have you overcome your condition? The truth is, I haven't. I'm constantly wrestling, struggling, growing with this thing. Every stage of life brings on a whole new set of challenges for any of us. And I think if we ever say that we have arrived, that we are there, that we're on top a couple months from retirement, that's a dangerous place to put ourselves in. Because it's usually in those moments that the winds of change blow. And they were blowing that day. So there I was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, completely naked, and my mom was sitting on the side of the bed. And with every belligerent, insulting word that a 10-year-old little boy knew, I let her have it. Why are you doing this to me? You don't love me. You're the worst mom in the world. Can't you see that I don't have any arms? I can't do this. And with everything I threw at her, a new tear ran down her cheek. But she was completely unyielding. She wasn't going to change her mind. I look back on that now as an adult and I can see that my words had to hurt her. But also my words can't express enough appreciation and gratitude for what she'd begun to do that day. What did she do? And why am I telling you all this? What does what happened between me and my family so long ago have to do with all of you as business professionals? It has to do with life. It has to do with who you are, who we are as organizations, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there. It has to do with tough love. Now, up until this moment, I'm kind of talking about the traditional notion of tough love, the kind where a mom or a coach or a boss tells someone no. But what I'm really driving at is what I had to learn about, what was the ultimate form of tough love. And that's not when somebody tells you no, it's not when you tell somebody else no, but it's when you tell yourself no. No to the fear, no to the anger, no to the distrust, all of those things so that you can say yes. See, because for every no in life, then there's freedom to say yes. Yes to love, yes to tolerance, yes to patience, yes to creativity. Yes, 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 yes. See, my mom wanted me to know that there was a wonderful, beautiful world out there, and there was only one person standing in my way. His name was John. My mentor, Zig Ziglar, used to say it like this: life is tough, but life becomes infinitely easier when you get tough on yourself. Now, Mom had 4 younger children that needed her attention. She needed me to learn it, and she needed me to learn it that moment. So she got up off the bed, she walked out of the room, and she closed the door behind her. Well, there I was, all alone in this room, completely naked. Pants were laying there on the floor where Ron had dropped them. And it was pretty clear that the only way I was going to get out of this room was if I tried to put those pants on. And ladies and gentlemen, that was the last thing that I wanted to do. Because if I could put those pants on, that started to beg some questions, what else could I do? And if I could put those pants on, it begged the question of what was I pulling over on other people? And if I could put those pants on, maybe I wasn't that disabled. And I did not want to put those pants on. But I learned the most powerful lesson of my life that morning. Probably one of the toughest ones of leadership, frankly. That the first thing you need to do is usually the last thing you want to do. So I stuck my naked body into my pants, and I lay down on the floor, and I put my feet up into the air and wiggled and jiggled to get the pants to go down to my knees. And then I stood up in a bow-legged squat with them around my knees. So from here on in, gravity's going to be my enemy. How do I get them up over my hips? I'm looking around trying to figure out how to do this. And I spotted the chest of drawers. The top drawer had a little round knob on it. And I thought, well, maybe if I could shimmy up against it, if I could snag the belt loop of the pants onto that little knob, if I could hold it there and squat, maybe I'd get the pants to come up over my hips. And it was shorter, so it was quite a reach. I'm rocking the furniture, the lamp is wobbling. And I finally snagged the loop on the knob. And I pulled, but I pulled too hard. The belt loop, the pants fell to the floor. Now I'm beginning to panic. So it was back on the floor again, feet in the air, wiggling, jiggling to get the pants to move. I don't have all the sweat glands in an armpit that you all have, so I get very hot. And the sweat comes down the brow, the back, the chest. What happens when we sweat? Our skin gets sticky and clammy. So the more I'm wiggling and jiggling to get the pants to move, the more they're getting stuck and the frustration's starting to build. By now, I'm working myself up into one hell of an ugly upset. My heart starts pounding, my blood starts pumping. I could feel the heat coming off the back of my neck. My throat was dry. Sweat was burning in my eyes. I felt like the room was closing in around me. And the emotions started to boil. I was feeling completely abandoned and absolutely rejected because I knew through those doors were my family, but none of them would come through them. And then, of course, there was the little voice again saying, "What are you doing? You can't do this. You don't have any arms. Those people don't love you." And finally, I fell to the floor in exhaustion. I was gasping and sobbing, and there was snot, sweat, tears everywhere. I caught a glimpse of myself, caught my breath enough just to look at the mirror. Caught a glimpse of myself. There's reflection that was coming from the closet door. And then I saw myself in the mirror. I was curled up in a fetal position, beet red, completely naked, just quivering in this cesspool. And I realized I was defeated. It was the loneliest moment of my life. But somewhere in the midst of that silence, it was like I heard God say, "You know, if you just shut up a minute, I can help you here." Remember how I said everything in life begins with our perception of the situation. And as I lay there on the floor, suddenly my perspective shifted. I started thinking about other disabled people who had worse conditions than I could imagine. And I remember thinking about how they thought out their problems. They thought creatively. They talked them out. They didn't make them mean all sorts of things. They didn't fight themselves. They fought their condition. And suddenly I realized that I had a choice to make. And ladies and gentlemen, I will assert that every one of us has that exact same choice to make. There's nothing more powerful in the universe than a human being's ability to exercise their God-given free will to choose. And I chose to be responsible. And I got up off that floor. It didn't happen that day. It didn't happen that week. I don't remember if it happened that month, but slowly over time I began to figure things out. And choosing to be responsible, I put myself on a path of creative thinking. I've had to come up with more creative solutions in a day or a week than many of you come up with in a month just to get in this room. You might notice, for example, that my shirt is tailored around the bottom. When you don't have hands, you can't tuck your shirt tails into your pants. So my philosophy is, if it causes a problem, cut it off. This is my wallet right here. It's a vinyl ticket holder from the London Underground. I keep my driver's license, dollar bills, credit cards in the bottom of my shoe. It's flat, easy to access. I can't keep it in my back pocket. I'd give myself a hernia every time I reach for it. Those are just a couple of examples of the things that I've had to figure out. Now I want to give you an idea of what life is like today since I made that choice to get up off that floor. You see, here's the thing about choices. If you really get present to the fact that you have a choice, if you really understand that, an incredible burden of responsibility will come down on your shoulders like you've never felt before. And that's why people will avoid it at every turn. They will come up with every excuse in the world why it's someone else's fault. But when we focus on ourselves and what we have the power to change, a whole world opens up. Today, several times a month, I'll pack my bags, I'll get in the car, I'll drive to the airport, head off on a different direction to give a seminar once in a while around the world. That means toting the heavy luggage through the airport, getting my foot up on a high counter to sign into a hotel room. Back home, I own my own home. So if the garage door breaks or the furnace quits, I got to get in there and try to fix it with my feet before calling for an expensive repairman. I like to cook. I like to horseback ride. I learned to snow ski in Austria. I've climbed all 272 steps of the Batu Cave. That's a Hindu temple built into a steep cliffside in Malaysia. I've snorkeled in the South China Sea, navigated the New York, Paris, and London subway systems on my own. I've written a book. I have my master's degree. I've met the Holy Father in the Vatican. But most importantly, I'm married to a very beautiful woman. Her name is Christine, and we have a 9-year-old little girl named Faith Teresa. Now, I just rattled that off for 2 very important reasons. The first was to brag. The second was to ask you a question. If I can do all those things that I just listed, what was stopping a 5-year-old little boy from going out on a playground and having fun with his friends? What's changed? This hasn't changed, and this never will. How often do we look at our lives and we say, if only I had more of this, and if only I had more of that, or if only he weren't that way, then everything will be okay. And what I'm really driving at, ladies and gentlemen, is that our only real handicaps are the small thoughts that blind us, the hardened feelings that deafen us, and the old, tired excuses that paralyze us. Those are the real cripplers in life. And if you can change those things, your life can change in powerful and extraordinary ways. I threw a lot at you. Our time is limited. Matt's got a couple of questions. We'll hit them real quick.
First, a round of applause for John. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.